Hello, this will be the first in a short series of videos on rearranging formulas, or another way of saying it, changing the subject of a formula. Now, subject of a sentence, the dog is brown, is the object that you're interested in. So the word dog is the subject, and then is the verb. So in an algebraic equation, similarly, the subject is the variable usually on the left, in this case y, and I like to think of the equal sign as being the verb. And then you've got the predicate on the right hand side, and think of that equation, or sorry, that expression as being the predicate. So for this equation here, y is the subject, and what we're going to learn to do is to change the equation to make one of the other variables the subject. So we can make m the subject, or x, or c. Now it's very similar to solving equations. So the instruction here is change the subject of the formula to m, and I like to give my students this little table here. Order of operations says you do brackets first, then you do indices and powers, then you do multiplication and division, and finally addition and subtraction. To solve equations, or to change the subject of a formula, you basically undo those steps in the opposite order. So the first thing I have to do is undo any adding and subtracting. Then I undo multiplying and dividing. Then I undo indices. And the last step is I undo any operations inside the brackets. Okay, so here's a couple of simple examples. A is the subject of the formula. I want to make m the subject, so I've got to get rid of this plus p. Now the opposite of adding p is subtracting p. So when you're solving equations, you do the same operation to both sides. So we subtract p from both sides. On the right-hand side, plus p minus p cancels out, leaving just an m. And on the left-hand side, I have a subtract p. And then finally, we write the m on the left, because usually the subject is on the left, and we write the expression on the right. Okay, similarly, here's the equation a equals m minus p, and I want to make m the subject. So adding and subtracting is undone first. I've got to subtract p. The opposite of subtracting p is adding p. Minus p plus p, well, you can say it equals 0, because minus 6 plus 6 is 0, minus 10 plus 10 is 0, minus p plus p is 0, or you can just say they cancel out. That leaves m on the right and a plus p on the left, and then just swap sides. M equals a plus p. Okay, moving on to the next question. This time we don't have any adding and subtracting. We've got 3 multiplied by m. If there's no operation between the coefficient and the variable, then the operation is multiplication. We don't show it because the multiply sign looks too much like an x. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. And in algebra, we usually show dividing using the fraction bar. The 3's divide out or cancel out. That leaves m on the right and a over 3 on the left. And swapping sides, m equals a over 3. After you've done a few of these, you can often leave that step out and just say, after I've divided both sides by 3, I've got m left on that side, so you just write it on the left. Equals gets copied down, and a divided 3 gets copied on the right. So it just saves one line of setting up. I'll do that on the next question. Here I've got the operation of division. The opposite to dividing by 4 is multiplying by 4. In fact, I'm going to do something else that I often do. I don't want to write an x because a times, sorry, because it looks too much like an x. So I'm just going to use my dot for multiply. So times 4 times 4. 4 divides out 4. Now this time I'm going to save one line of setting out. I've got m by itself on the right. So I'm going to write it on the left. M equals 4a. Okay, let's move on to two-step equations. These are called one-step equations because you're only undoing one operation. Oh, no, we'll do a couple more one-step ones. This time instead of a letter, so instead of a number there, I've got a letter. The algebra is exactly the same. I want to make m the subject, so I divide by the variable p on both sides. The p's cross out. That leaves m by itself, which I'll write over here. And m equals a over p. And on this side, m is divided by p. The opposite of dividing by p is multiplying by p. Multiplying by p. The p's divide out. I've got the m by itself, which I'll write on the left. And normally we write, if we got a product of variables, we write them in alphabetical order. So m equals a times p. Okay, now we'll move on to two-step equations. Okay, this is when it starts to get slightly harder, but if you follow this sequence, it's not too bad. So the first thing we have to do is undo any adding or subtracting. So here m is multiplied by 2 and 5 is added. So we have to first undo the add 5. The opposite of adding 5 is subtract 5. So I do that to both sides. Minus 5 plus 5 cancels out. And my new equation is 2m equals a take 5. And finally, to undo multiplying by 2, I divide by 2. The 2's on the right cancel out. Notice I had to divide everything on the left by 2. So not just the a, not just the 5. So the vinculum goes underneath the whole expression. And I'll write the m on the left. And I'll write the expression, what it equals, on the right. Okay, now looking at the one on the right-hand side, this looks fairly similar to the one we just did, but there's brackets. Now, normally, I would undo adding and subtracting first, but because that's inside the brackets, I in fact have to undo that one last. So the first thing I have to do is to get rid of the 2 times. The opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. So both of those cross out. That leaves me with m plus 1 on the right, a over 2 on the left. Now I can undo the adding 1 by subtracting 1, plus 1 minus 1, cancel. That leaves me with just m equals, and I can't write this any simpler than a on 2 subtract 1. Let's keep going. We'll do one more. No, we won't do one more. We'll leave it at that. Okie dokie. Then that's a start to changing the subject of a formula. In the next video, we'll look at some slightly more complicated equations.